business with a servant's heart. Welcome to the podcast. Inspiration, motivation takes. Listen to the pod.
Welcome to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. Every episode is an invitation, a reminder that business and life isn't just about profit, it's about purpose. It's about showing up with a servant's heart every deal, every decision, every day. Today's guest is going to light you up like no tomorrow. You'll be motivated, you'll be challenged, and most importantly, you're going to walk away with tools that inspire action, action, both in your life and in your business. But before we dive in, here's your homework. How are you going to serve yourself and others today? Even a small act of kindness or courage can change the game. So lean in, take notes. Let's discover how servant leadership in business can create ripple effects that last far beyond the bottom line. And quick shout out to my sponsor, Epic Impact, the only universal emotionally resonant messaging framework that works anywhere for any audience. This 4-step system transformed how I pitch, post, and podcast. Engage, persuade, inspire, and close. I use it daily and it works. You can grab your free trial at epicimpact.ai. Use the promo code STEVE, S-T-E-V-E. Start inspiring action today. Impact, growth, serving. Nonprofits do that, but they struggle. I think it's 80-90% of the struggle. I know my guest will answer that question right away for me, but being tied to it, whether you're a founder, entrepreneur, or just an 8-to-5 person, changes your universe. That's why I'm super excited to have my guest on today. Let's welcome John. Welcome to the Doing Business with Servant's Heart podcast.
Hey, Steve, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm really happy to be here.
What's the impact of charity?
Well, the common answer to that question is, and a very important answer to that question is the impact that happens on, in community for whatever cause it is that you care about. So, kids get fed, sick people get healed, medicines are found, education happens, all sorts of different types of impact. I mean, there's lots of different things that are charitable. So, but here's what doesn't get talked about as much that I think is equally as important is what happens to you, in your words, maybe the servant, what happens to the donor. And I think the impact on self and on family and on community of the people that participate is really big too. I think it keeps us alive. It makes us human. We all like to give, and it's important to remember that because when we give, we get something in return ourselves.
So what you're saying is, which I love, and we talked about in the green room before the show, is what's the donors impact? We talk about Ronald McDonald House, their impact. We know that. We see on TV St. Jude Pickens things that are we know. So you're going to flip this a little bit and say, hey, donor, what's the impact you're making by supporting these charitable impact, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth looking at it that way, right? There's two sides to every equation, and so we always look in the charity sector on what happens to the cause that I'm giving my time or my money towards helping. But in so doing, how does that impact us? And I think the impact there is really high. There's even science out there that increasingly where people are going, gee, wow, like look at this. People who give are happier, they're lower stress, they live longer, and you don't have to be a scientist, I don't think, to relate to that, because when you do help people out, you do feel something in return.
I love science, but I'm glad you mentioned it. It's not that complicated. It's pretty much you're happy, I give you money, I help somebody out, you're happy. I know I'm dumbing it down too much, but that's really the bottom line, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Exercise, it's important, right? To build, big muscles and stuff like that. Right. Well, maybe, or sure, but it's also, your mental health, how you feel. So, lots of these things that we do for ourselves, and that contribute towards other things, also impact us. And it's just important to recognize that, it's not to say be selfish for yourself, give, but it's to remember, that when you're giving, you're actually doing something for yourself as well.
Yeah. And giving to where you're comfortable, where you're able. Don't give 100,000 and take a loan out 100,000 to give to Ronald McDonald House because you want to give. That's not what giving. That's just the complete opposite. I love that. Why you focus on donors. I'm excited for you to jump into Charitable Impact. Tell us the journey, what people would go through when they get involved with that.
Well, Charitable Impact is what's called a donor advised fund, and a donor advised fund is kind of like having your own personal foundation, or in a more lay vernacular, not less charitable vernacular. It's like having your own bank account just for charitable giving, and so it's a tool that's built for the donor, right? Whether you're an individual or a corporation, and it gives you the tools that you need to manage your own giving journey, right? And so just to juxtapose that with how most people encounter charity in the world is through a sales and marketing mechanism that's known as fundraising, right? Fundraising is really important. But what if you are someone who has your own lens on what you care about changing? What tool is there to help you create that change, right? And the answer in the charity world, in my considered opinion, is the donor advised fund. So I started Charitable Impact as a donor advised fund because, generally speaking, where's there to go to get help for yourself as a charitable donor? Like, where do you go? Right? If you want a mortgage, you go to the bank. If you want, there's all these places. If you want to sell your house, you hire a realtor. Like, if you want to become an impactful donor, where do you go to get the tools, let alone any of the service help? And generally speaking, the answer to that was there's really nowhere obvious to go. So we started Charitable Impact to solve that problem, very donor-centered problem.
What solutions do you provide for the charitable advice donors, and how do you solve those challenges?
Yeah. So we provide humans, so there's humans around who will, take your call, service you, right? And these are just people who, like me, know a lot about philanthropy, so they can kind of meet you where you're at and help you understand how to go about things. And by the way, that how do I go about creating change is, in my opinion, the problem to solve, right? Why should I create change? Most people, well, if they stop and think about it, they have an answer to that ultimately. What do I want to give towards? Like, what cause do I care about? Most people, if they stop and think about it, that's an important one.
Big
But
key.
if they
Yeah.
stop and think about it, they know. Are they more into education, or more into, helping relieve poverty? Are they more into supporting their church, or whatever, right? So how do I go about doing that? So humans are good to, have a conversation with me where you're at. The other thing we do, Steve, is we're a web-based platform. We started, building on the web right away when we started Charitable Impact, and so there's tools that you can help develop to help people solve these problems. Now, if I could say one last thing, people are always like, hey, the donor advised fund, like, what's the best part of your donor advised fund? In my opinion, the best part of our donor advised fund is the best part of everyone's donor advised fund. And what it is when you have your own giving account, it allows you to separate the donation, which generates the tax receipt for you, from the other decisions of, like, what are you going to use that money for? And so that separation is really, really important, right? Because now we can take a relatively complex problem of, am I going to give the money away, and where am I going to give it, and separate it into those two component parts. So am I going to give the money away? Okay, how much am I going to give? Am I going to use cash? Am I going to use, stocks? Am I going to, what am I going to use? How frequently? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be one big gift a year? Those types of decisions. And focus on small decisions, make better ones, and then separately come across, once you know how much money is there and how frequently, for example, it's coming into your donor advised fund, and say, gee, how am I going to use this money? So the value proposition of the donor advised fund is the ability to separate your donations from your spending of those donations. And in that way, again, it's kind of like a bank account, right? Like, everyone has a bank account today, so it's like no one really thinks about how awesome that is, how awesome the tool of the bank account is. But I think I know those same theories apply to charitable giving as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful what you're doing. And what comes to mind for me is there's nonprofits out there that aren't doing what they say. They say 95% of their money goes to cancer research, for example, when only 10%. Do you help the donor decide when they go, hey, I go to you, John, hey, I want to work with XYZ nonprofit. You do some due diligence for me that I don't have time to do to go, hey, is my money going where it's supposed to go?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the sense that yes, in the sense that we give you tools. Like, for example, there's a profile page on every charity. You can see, stuff about their money. Do they spend too much money on fundraising? You know, so in that way, the answer is yes. We give you that information. We give you the tools to learn more quite quickly about these charities. Where the answer is no, is we don't tell you this is a good charity, that's a bad charity. And the reason is because like everyone's lens on that is different, right? So and actually a good example of that is like, is in the education world or in the religious world. It's like, you giving money, like, which is the better church? Well, often the better church is the church you go to. Which is the school you want to fund? Is it because it's the best school? Like, what's the best school in the country? Like, that's an impossible question to answer. It's so in the eyes of the beholder, right? So
Yeah.
like charity's the same way. So it's not our job to say, look, that's a good charity, that's a bad charity. It's more our job to say, hey, who are you? What are you interested in and why? Where do you live? What causes do you care about? How come? And then to guide people towards, maybe you should be looking at this type of stuff. And in there, in the United States, you went down from 1.5 million charities, maybe down to 30, maybe down to 10. And then instead of saying of those 10, this is the best charity, as if we're omni knowing, which we're not.
Yeah.
Instead saying like, look, you sound like someone who really doesn't like charities that spend too much on fundraising. Why don't you pay attention to that data point?
That is the greatest answer. I've asked that question about 10 times. It's the best answer I've heard because you make it donor centric, not charitable impact centric. And you said that. I just want to reiterate that because, yeah, you can go the other way. It still would be good. We're like, hey, here's the 5 we think are great. But you check the servant's box company checkbox. It's virtual, guys. Like, but I love doing that because it is about them. And we can't say, no, don't do Roman Dollhouse because I love children. I don't have, children. I have my church. I donate to my church every month because it's my church. And I love that. You're not going to tell me, well, why don't you do this church? Because they do this. I'm riffing on this because it is powerful to know this when companies do what you do. So let's dive into a real life success story of a donor that you work with and what was the ROI benefits of that?
Well, I'm asked this question, relatively frequently, which is awesome because I think it's a great question. And I don't well, Sarah, she's 24. I don't have one of those answers for you. But what I do have is like the type of transformation I love to see when people meet the donor advised fund is where they become better donors. And I get some flack from my colleagues at Charitable Impact saying, well, what is a better donor? And fair enough. But generally speaking, like just on the surface, like a better donor is someone who, first of all, they participate. Right? You're not a good donor if you're not participating. And they feel comfortable participating. And as they get more comfortable participating, they participate more and they start to take more personal responsibility for what they do. Right. And so a better donor is just like a better cook or, a better athlete or, a better engineer. Right. They've got more comfort and confidence in what they do. They have more perspective. They have, that comes from experience. And as a result of that, they feel better about the decisions they make and they take more responsibility for them. So it doesn't mean that like the best athletes don't make all their basketball shots, right? They just understand, better maybe than the junior basketball player, why I missed that shot. Right. I was off balance. I was this. Okay, I'm going to try work on my balance. And so the stories I like to come back a bit more. That's the context setting for the answer to the
Yeah.
question, Steve. So what I like is when the donor meets the tool, the donor advised fund, you start to see a bunch of people engage in a different way with the charity sector, and they start to take on more personal responsibility. Now, and they become more proactive, okay, as opposed to a reactive donor. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're a reactive donor, first of all, thank you, because you're participating, you're doing something to give back to community. Okay, but so often we give when we're asked to give, as opposed to giving because it's something that we make a part of our life, right? And guess who gets good at basketball? People who just play when they're asked to play, or people who choose to play and say, you know what, 3 times a week, I'm going to go and shoot free throws, and I'm going to play with my buddies on Saturday, right? You don't have to go to the NBA, but these are the people that we see, becoming better donors. And that's the story I love. When you see someone who comes in as a reactive, kind of pseudo engaged donor, and they take over more control of their life, and they go, huh, this is actually cool for me and
Yeah.
and those around me, and so I'm going to participate differently, and I'm going to participate better.
I love this because I talk about all the time when I speak about servant's heart. Everybody has it. Everybody has that charitable soul about them. Obviously, not everybody's doing it because charities are struggling and for all that. So this is something that you make it a little bit easier to be that donor, be more comfortable with it because you practice it. And let's jump into education. We've talked about the last 10 minutes or so about education. How is that a big part of what you do?
Well, I'd say it's an area where we fail, notwithstanding the fact that I personally believe that education is arguably the most important thing to do for a donor. And the reason is, you nailed it, Steve, is that, like, we're born generous, I believe, right? So, you talked about the soul, this generous, the servant's heart that we have. So that's nature. Do you agree with that?
100%. Well, 1000%. Let's get big.
Okay. Well, I agree that that's nature, but, like, what happens if you don't nurture nature? Right. And so you can come back to this nurture nature kind of argument. And instead of going like deep into the philosophy, although that would be fun, um, it's more to say, okay, well, like, just for some reason I'm talking about basketball. So, if you're born a natural athlete, but you never, and maybe you're even tall and you're strong, but you never, touch a ball, and you never dribble a ball, and you never shoot a ball, you're not going to be good at basketball. And you never meet a coach, and you never get on a team, you're not going to be good at basketball, notwithstanding you may have all the traits required to be an excellent basketball player, right? And so again, in that context, it's like, if you're born generous, which I believe you are, we still have to nurture that, right? And so education is a word that can be applied there. The three most important things are, like, literally teaching people about it, right? And then surrounding them with people who are doing it, so that there's some modeling. They can look at mom and dad, or they can look at their uncle, or they can look at the people in their community. This is where churches are excellent, and go, wow, like, people are actually participating, giving. Maybe that's something I should try. And you've got people to go and ask questions to, the third important part of learning, I think, which is experiencing it yourself.
Yeah.
Right. You don't just get good at basketball by watching it on TV.
Love the sports business bridge. In this case, sports nonprofit bridge, because I'm a big sports guy. I play a lot. It's there. I mean, you just gave. So I'm glad you did that, because I do it all the time when I speak, because it's natural. You don't have to be an NBA player, a PGA golfer. You could be just, but there's that bridge of what you do with business, what you do with sports really crosses a lot. That's why I say kids are missing sports. I don't know how it's in Canada, but here, a lot less kids are playing, and it bothers me. But we'll work out. We'll start a charity and fix it.
Bothers me too, Steve. But that's awesome. And so I like you. I love sport, and I love what you're saying there. And I think it's a really actually important analogy for charity, because how many times have you heard, like, hey, do you give, do you care about things changing? People are like, yeah. Then you're like, do you give money or time towards that? They're like, no. You're like, oh, why not? And one of the answers you hear, there's a few big regular answers you hear to that question, but one of them is like, well, I just don't have, the money yet, but I'm working on stuff and I'm going to be rich one day. And when I'm rich, I'm going to give money away. And it's like, well, that's kind of like saying, well, I'm not going to play golf, but when I make the PGA Tour, I'm going to start, and it's like, that's not the way it works, right? The only context in which that works, in my experience, and I've been around the block a few times, is when the giving is motivated exclusively by tax planning. Okay, and it's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but outside of that context, that's not how it works. Those rich people who give for tax planning reasons then bump into the reality that they have no idea how to give their money away well, as opposed to the person who, you know, starts, if they're tithing in the church, for example, and they learn about it as a young kid, and they grow up kind of doing it more, and they don't have the money in university, but they might volunteer a bit still, and they're involved in their community. They get their first job, they give $100 away a month, they make more money, they give a little bit more away, and then maybe they do sell their company and make it big one day. Those people end up being the best donors in society, because they're not just now wealthy if they do sell their company, but they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to be a PGA Tour pro. That's not why you play golf, but if you don't play golf, you're never going to be a PGA Tour pro.
Yeah. That chicken before the egg thing. I always screw it up. So I'm not going to go there. And what you're talking about too is a donor purpose and passion, which I know feeds into that. I've got to bring you back for part 2. We're coming to the end here. You are just absolutely amazing how you take charitable in such a servant's heart mentality. Because people think just because there's charities out there, a lot of servant's heart. No, there's a lot of charities either falsifying, cheating, lying. I hate to say it, but a good thing is beaten up.
Sure. Well, and there's lots of bad restaurants out there too. So the way that how do you know, instead of being like, well, I'm never going to go out and eat food at a restaurant because I went to a bad restaurant once, it's more like, how do you become experienced enough to figure out who you are and what you're looking for, and what, the signs are of a bad restaurant. And sorry to move away from sports to restaurants, but back to why you need to engage. I mean, there are bad charities out there for sure, but how are you gonna recognize those? The more experience you have, the more you've been around, the easier it is to recognize. So people are kind of like, well, I give to charities, but charities are ineffective. It's like, all charities are ineffective? And they're like, well, no, probably not. It's like, okay, I agree with you that not all charities are ineffective, but some definitely are. So what's your definition of ineffective? Why do you think that? And how do you start to recognize that in the organizations that you might consider giving to? It comes back to education. It comes back to experience. So you got to play the game in order to avoid the bad charities.
Well, and I'll end with this, and I've got a segue to restaurants. So your perfect segue. Money's emotional, whether you're buying a house, starting a new job with a new income, or being charitable. You're giving money, or you're giving your hard-earned money away. It's got to be right, because it's going to burn you, or you're going to burn out, or whatever, and you're not going to stop. We don't want you to stop. We want to take care of nonprofits, churches, and all that. Don't use that. So we got to bring you back. We'll talk about that after. We're bringing it back, guys and girls. He's got to come back because this is so cool. So I've got a reservation at a restaurant for you. We're going to play here a little bit. It's a table of 4. You're going to sit in one of the chairs. In the 3 empty chairs, who are you going to invite to converse with, whether dead or alive? Who would you like to talk to? And what food would you order?
Yes. Well, I'd start by, I'm going to try answer your question in 2 ways. I'll answer it more directly in a second, but I'm one of those guys when I go to a restaurant, I'm married, and I love it when my wife orders, right? It's just like, I like to just, I'm happy to eat it. I like lots of different types of food. I like and I like a little bit of surprise. So, I don't want to be boring and say like, I'd let them order, but to be honest, if I had these 3 people and part of getting them to this dinner with me was making sure they were going to be happy with the food, I would go with whatever food they want. But if everything's up to me, when I was younger, I lived for a little bit in China, and I just fell in love with, and partly could stay there for longer because I fell in love with Chinese food. So I'd probably eat Chinese food of the kind of like Sichuan, the spicier variety. That's probably where I'd go. Um, the type of people I'd have at the table, and I'll, if I going to keep my charity hat on just to stay on theme here, um, I would choose some mix of, a person with the story of Mother Teresa, someone who gave absolutely everything, and but largely through her time and talent, right? Which then drew money in, combined with the type of donor who became very, very wealthy, uh, but gave it all away, basically died with zero. So the same type of thing, but totally different story. And then I would also, increasingly today, I would also want to bring someone who I viewed to be a servant, but did so in the political world, through the political world. You know, um, um, so someone like, because I'm your question's so profound. I'm not. I'd have to think about it, but like someone like a Mahatma Gandhi or someone who like agree or disagree with him or what he did, but so someone like that who like through political means um really achieved great change. And the reason I would say that, because those are the sort of three things that I think are required to actually create sustainable change, right? It's not just money. Well, you were talking about church earlier, so it's time, talent, and treasure,
Yeah.
right? It's so you need to give the time, you need to give the talent, and you need to give the money to the cause that you care most about. Now, we all have time, talent, and treasure. I'm segueing into a different answer, so I'll stop there. But at the dinner table, eating Sichuan based Chinese food, i would I would have those three types of people. So let me just give you a name, an American name, for the donor money type of person, someone like Chuck Feeney. I don't know if you know the name, but
Yeah.
he became very wealthy, and basically died with zero. Incredible story of really using treasure to dedicate towards leaving the world a place, knowing he couldn't take his money with him.
Yeah. It's powerful. Such a great answer. I mean, it's your depth of that is, and I'm not surprised because the whole show you've been deep in charitable. It's awesome. You're an incredible guest. Your passion is unbelievable. Thank you for taking the time being a guest. I know people listening, John, are going, how can I connect with them? So how can they connect with you?
Well, I'm a Canadian, so I'm up in Canada. I'm at charitableimpact.com. We're on the socials. You can reach out to me. We can reach out to me. Through the organization, no problem. I love to interact and answer questions. I love what you're doing here, Steve,
Thank
and
you.
thanks for being complimentary to some of what I've said. But you're driving the show by asking such great questions. So I'm grateful for that. Um, and really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, it takes a community, and for us, it's a community of two to impact the audience, who then shares it with somebody else to impact them. And thank you again. And reach out to him, even though he's Canadian, he can help. There's ways he can do it. We've talked about it. Doesn't matter. If you're in charities, reach out to him as well. If you have a nonprofit, reach out to him. There's so many ways that he can help, and he's got a servant's heart. Your last homework for the day is subscribe to the YouTube channel or my podcast. The YouTube channel is more recent. That's why I say that, but it's sending these gifts out. If you know somebody that's got a nonprofit, share this link with them. Go ahead, just listen to John. Oh my God, you got to hear him, and you can impact them. Charitable impact, social impact, business impact. Why not do it? That's what gifts are. That's what John does. It's a gift. So with that being said, me and John want to thank all of you for watching or listening to this podcast, and we'll see all of you in the next episode of Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.